Hello, guys and gals. Me, Mutahar, and oh, Canada's destroying the internet, man. Day in, but day out. It's happening. I feel like you know how VPN companies sponsor every YouTuber. I feel like VPN companies sponsor the government a lot because they're the only ones stupid enough to make some of the decisions we're about to read. Now, you probably heard about it if you're Canadian. Google has made the difficult decision that when Bill C-18 takes effect, we will remove Canadian news links from our search, news, and discover products. You know, the internet is the last bastion of freedom, okay? The last thing I want is the government sticking its wang where it probably shouldn't, okay? Anytime you get regulations on the internet to the point where it controls what we see in our search engines, what we see in our algorithms, I feel like that's just a little gateway drug into government censorship, further government control when they don't need to have control over certain things, and ultimately it means a less free world for us, okay? Look, personally, I'd go back to the early 2000s, okay? Forums, Newgrounds, all right, and call it a day, all right? The ability for everyone to have websites instead of consolidating all that information onto Reddit, Twitter, whatever. I love a free and open internet. But I feel like as time goes on, more and more countries are stopping. And I made a video a little bit ago, the Muta VPN 2, where I showed you how to make your own free VPN, free, that was hosted in the United States, which is like the last bastion of true freedom. So let's get started as to what's going on, okay? I want to get into all the facts. I want to look into it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bill C-18, all right? So this is the first session. Let's read into it. Summary. This enactment regulates digital news intermediaries to enhance fairness in the Canadian digital news marketplace and contribute to its sustainability. And a long story short from this legal paperwork, if you want to look through the nitty-gritty, you absolutely can. But to summarize it, two companies, Google and Meta, all right, so Facebook, have basically been asked to pay companies, news companies, for showing the links to their news services. Which, ladies and gentlemen, I want to explain how search engines work, okay? When you search for something on the internet, like if I search for submarines, then congratulations, Google's going to show me the most relevant information. Google does this, DuckDuckGo, Yahoo, Brave Search, Bing, all right, Lycos, whatever search engine you use, they all give you relevant information as pertaining to an algorithm. Now, in a lot of cases, news organizations, so big places like the New York Times, Politico, like big, like known news organizations typically have like their news squares. They show up first no matter what. Now, depending on where you live, you may also get news from your region, right? Like there are going to be Canadian news agencies that are going to be up there providing their news. So what the Canadian news companies apparently seem to want is an actual payment for showing their search results on Google, on Facebook, and anything. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is effectively a link tax, which, again, according to Google, creates uncertainty for our products and exposes us to uncapped financial liability simply for facilitating Canadians' access to news from Canadian publishers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is an incredibly brain-dead take to have from the Canadian government, and I'll explain exactly why. Now, of course, coming to the government of Canada, this is all the way from April 2022, by the way, okay? They introduced this bill to ensure fair competition for news medias and sustainability of, like, local news. So, of course, the Online News Act, they call it, which would establish a new legislative and regulatory framework to ensure fairness in the Canadian digital news marketplace. More than 450 news outlets have closed since 2008. More than 60 of those closures have occurred in the last 2 years alone. Digital platforms and social media are now the gateway where people find, read, and share news. Because of this, advertising revenues have shifted away from local news and journalists to these gatekeepers, who profit from the sharing and distribution of Canadian news content. Now, initially, when I was reading this, I actually thought that this bill was actually going to target Google AMP, which is Accelerated Mobile Pages. For those of you who have no idea what AMP is, it's basically an ability for you to take large bloated web pages that would be on the desktop browser and like condense them to smaller chunks for mobile platforms, right? Now, from what I understand over here, from what I believe, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, from my research, it appeared for a long time that Google was basically scraping data from like big publications and just condensing it into their own version of a mobile page, something they would host and they would create. Now, when you click onto it, you would not necessarily notice a difference between like the actual website and Google's AMP service. But what Google would do is they would input their own advertising through Google AdSense and basically profiteer off of somebody else's work and kill advertising revenue for the host website. Now, I don't know how likely this is anymore. I tend to use plugins that absolutely destroy AMP no matter what. But I don't know how big of an issue this remains. I actually thought the government was targeting that. If they were, that would be cool. I totally am okay with the fact that we're trying to get like less big tech control over a lot of our information. But this is not that. This isn't even close to that. The government does a bafflingly stupid decision and decides to target the wrong thing. Again, I honestly feel like the people that are writing these laws have no fucking clue on what happens with most modern technical services. And because of that, a lot of Canadians who get their news now will not be given Canadian news because, surprise, surprise, most people Google for shit. Most people load up Facebook and search for shit. I rag on Facebook all the time, but it's still one of the most used platforms in the world. Now, because of this, these guys have all the leverage. Google can easily just say, yeah, whatever, okay, we're not going to give you guys any traffic. We'll just give all your competition traffic. This is quite literally the biting the hand that feeds you moment. A lot of these publications and publishers that believe that they were owed money simply for getting free fucking advertising just shows you how out of touch these organizations are. If anything, it's going to kill news organizations even faster when they have deliberately blacklisted themselves from the largest search and discovery algorithm imaginable. How fucking stupid can you be? Now, ladies and gentlemen, because of all of this, because of this situation, obviously, Canadians, they're not going to get their information from like Canadian news organizations. But you know what they're gonna get? They're probably gonna get a bunch of American foreign news agencies covering Canadian news that happen to get onto the algorithm. And surprise, surprise, Canada news organizations, legacy media, you just buried yourself even faster. Now, I'm not a huge defender of like legacy media, of like mainstream media, period. I think personally, the best source of news is literally like social media and the ability for people to have 8 or 9 different news sources and aggregate which one is the true service out of it. Yes, you have to put in more effort. There is more work required, but I feel like you get a much more true and larger like a picture from that instead of like the government mouthpiece, so to speak. So I'm totally not even feeling bad that the government like news pieces are slowly dying out. If anything, they're dying out even quicker. I'm actually just baffled at how like profoundly stupid some of these organizations can be. The other big thing about it too is I really dislike the idea of the government further regulating what we can see in our algorithms and like information feeds across the internet. If you ask me on my personal beliefs, I think there should be no government regulation when it comes to the internet, okay? Aside from the actual key important pieces we have. You know, obviously things like stopping, illegal material like child pornography, criminal elements. I think when it comes to search and discoverability of any kind of content on the internet, it should be laissez-faire, period. And yes, I know bad things can come of that, but obviously I think personally that there is far more good in that line of thinking than there is bad. There's also a case to be made that the financials of some of these like local and like major news organizations may be a bit too overbloated as well. I think actual regulation would have been stronger if we had tied to maybe getting rid of like advertising in terms of like how invasive some of these big tech companies tend to spy on people. If we actually had data protection laws, with some protections from incredibly targeted advertising, I think that would have been an interesting way to go down. I don't believe that the regulation that the government introduced to like basically bring in a link tax is benefiting anybody but these top organizations who literally need government help in order to survive for the next few years, really months, years, because there's going to be a point where these traditional media pieces are going to die off. And their replacements are obviously the influencer or the person who is more connected to the audience through TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Kick, whatever, Rumble. That's where like all of this is headed to anyways. But ladies and gentlemen, like actually regulating the internet to the point where like you have basically forced 2 private companies to completely cut off Canadian news organizations because they would have to be paid a link tax. This is kind of like if I was outside and you asked me where the supermarket was or where like the museum was or like something close by, I would have to pay the museum money in order to have advertised you or shown people your location. It's actually that bafflingly wild to me. But ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. The last time I covered it, I think most Canadians really that hit up my DMs were really agreeable. There were a couple individuals who worked for these corporations who said, no, I'm in the wrong. I just want to know what people think of this stuff, okay? As a Canadian, this stuff matters to me. But, from somebody outside, I'm sure you're all laughing at Soviet Kanakistan, okay? And feel free to do so, okay? I love to get laughed at, and I love to laugh at. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.